Well, in honor of Vince Neil this week, did you see the story about his plane? Yikes, I think it was out in Phoenix, I think Scottsdale Airport. His private plane collided with another plane on private property there and killed his pilot. The pilot of Vince Neil's plane died. 3 other people were injured. Vince Neil was not on the plane at the time. Last thing I knew, there was some sort of problem with the landing gear. I think that's what they said. It wasn't anything, nefarious or matter of pilot error. I think it was equipment failure. But, yeah, it's a hard way for Vince to find his way back into the news this week. So I figured I'd play that. Plus, don't go away, mad. Just go away. I think it kind of fits. Kind of fits the entire feeling. I think so. I had a nice little exchange on the Facebook earlier this week. That was fun. She's like, well, what's wrong with fair treatment and equal play and blah, blah, there's the self-righteous, the stuff that they actually believe that their ideology is about. Fairness and compassion and everything else. And I threw the old Karl Marx quote at her from, it goes, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Which is basically what she's saying. Have compassion, give the poor people, raise the poor people up to the level of equity shit. Right? And she didn't realize that was Marxist at all. I'm sure she didn't. I didn't ask her. I didn't sit there and interview with her. I didn't try to dialogue and discourse with this woman. Of course not. I said something to the effect of, don't go away, mad. Just go away. It was much more profane than that. That's what this is. They couch this stuff. From each according to his abilities, merit. To each according to his needs, equity. It's Marxist. It's one of his most famous quotes. And they have managed to engage in rhetorical voodoo and disguise the foundations of this shit. Anyway, I mentioned Christopher Rufo earlier. He's got a great book, came out last year, right on the heels of me asking. I think on the podcast, if I remember correctly, it's like, well, where did all this stuff come from? I mean, it's obviously being fed to us from some sort of a stream, a well of some sort. Where is it coming from? How is it being fed to us? It has to have a source, right? And right on the heels of me asking that question, Rufo released his book. Forget the name of it now. I didn't have it in here. I was counting on looking at the title back there before I did this. Anyway, came out later. You'll be able to find it. Christopher Rufo, R-U-F-O. I'm surprised this guy is not in Trump's cabinet, to be honest with you. He's done more for the state of Florida, for education in the state of Florida. He's been at the forefront, the vanguard of the anti-woke movement for years. And he's a guy who actually gets shit done within the system. Fantastic. And this book, I still have not finished reading it. I've had it at least a year, I think. And it's one of those books. There's a handful of these books, and Blank Slate's another one, that I've, kind of picked through here and there. I'm afraid to dig into them because of what I'm afraid they're going to send me off into some obsessive place and completely sidetrack what I'm doing. But I have to dig into this book now. I absolutely have to, because the crux of it is he talks about a guy, I think his name's Marcuse, and he was a pretty high-end, influential leftist who figured out early that the communists, the Marxists, were never going to succeed via a literal revolution. They weren't going to go into the streets and start setting off bombs and Molotov cocktails and overthrow the established order by force. That the antibodies, the American antibodies, are too strong. They learned that in the 1960s. And I think the exclamation point probably came right around Kent State. That's what most people say. That's when the 60s died, was at Kent State University in the early 70s. And they kind of retreated, went into a strategic retreat, sort of licked their wounds a little bit, and came up with the notion, borrowed from Chairman Mao, about the Long March, Mao's Long March to the Sea. It was sort of a tactical retreat, right? And it was tactical in the sense that it gave him a chance to regroup, reevaluate, and strike. And it worked. That's what Rufo puts forth happened with our 1960s communists. They went into retreat for a little while rather than attack from the front. A full frontal assault. On the American way of life, they decided that they were going to enter the institutions. They were going to infest the institutions, starting with the universities. And once they had people in the universities who could intellectually molest, brainwash, re-educate college-age kids, those kids then would move from college into the governmental institutions and other institutions, media institutions nationwide. This was back in the 1970s. If you look back, if you're old enough like me, if you're Gen X, and you look back at your life, how attitudes have changed, been couched as progress. Over the last 40 years, you see it. Particularly, and I'll transfer off into another guy that I'm reading who's talking about what happened in the 1980s as far as the Esalen Institute and education, where everybody started getting their participation trophies, really got entrenched in the 1990s, all based on bullshit research, by the way. But this is the thing, this is what's happened. This socialist, Marxist, communistic influence, the march through the institutions that began with Marcuse in the 1960s and 70s, has finally established itself throughout the institutions. Not in the people so much, but the institutions. Bureaucratic rot. Bureaucratic corruption. Bureaucratic rot. It had to be. It had to be rotten. It had to be, because every single socialist, Marxist, communist government that's ever existed has nearly collapsed under the weight of its own bureaucracy, under the weight of its own corruption. The bureaucracy is a symptom of the disease. It's not the disease itself. It's a symptom of the infection that has been coursing steadily, increasingly, coursing through the American system, the American body, the American systems, the American government for decades. And they almost won. They almost got there. Now, if you listen to the media and you listen to these batshit Democrats this week who are screaming, "We're at war, we're at war." You listen to these fuckers this week, you would think that Elon Musk has seized control of the U.S. government. He is the de facto president. Donald Trump is a dictator. How can that possibly be? How can Donald Trump be a dictator and Elon Musk seize power? It doesn't have to make sense. It's just rhetoric, okay? But that's what you would believe. That's what they're trying to tell you, that Donald Trump is the evil fascist who seized control of the government. As I mentioned in the first segment, on the heels of Doge, on the heels of someone opening up the cellar, opening up this festering pit of concealed rot and corruption that is symptomatic of every bloated left-wing bureaucracy that's ever existed. As soon as they started shining sunlight into that septic tank, that's when they've decided to go batshit. Because it's going to expose exactly what they've been up to, how they're using taxpayer money to further this march through not only our institutions, but also now to infect the institutions of other countries. All of the rhetoric coming from the Democrats this week reeks of desperation. Dictator, the billionaire class, evil Elon, Are they gaining traction with any of this? Have you noticed it? Have you seen any traction gained? Or are they just out there saying, fuck Trump? see how much we mean it? I don't know. I'll be very amazed. I think they'll get some traction with this eventually. Have to. I mean, there's 30%. Again, the usual suspects, the usual 30% will go along with anything they say. The Manchurian Marxists who don't know any better. But 70% of the country likes what they see so far. But to them, they're framing it as Trump is a dictator. Paradoxically, with Elon Musk has seized control of the government. Again, I go back to it. It doesn't even make any damn sense. Doesn't have to make sense, right? Just has to sound good. Just has to be chum to the sharks. Is Trump a dictator? Is he really? A lot of executive orders. I mean, I guess maybe you could look at it that way if you really, really wanted to. Or you could look at it that he's taking a wrecking ball to these rotted institutions and knocking them to the ground. That he was elected as an exterminator to come in and knock down these rotted edifications, knock down these rotted buildings, and get rid of the rats who have been infesting these organizations and these institutions for years. In fact, what he's doing is ending the long march through these institutions that started 40 years ago. And oh my God, do they hate that. Now, there may be overreach here. Barry Weiss, she was talking about one of the organizations, nonprofits, I think, something about democracy, I forget. You can go find it, that was shut down by Doge. This is Barry Weiss. I respect what she says most of the time. That may be true. There may be overreach here and there. It may be a lot of overreach. And I'll ask the question again. Do you think that Donald Trump is acting like a dictator? Do you think that he is the authoritarian they say he is? Do you think he's a fascist? Do you think that he is seizing power extra-constitutionally in the United States? Or is he using these methods because each and every institution throughout government, including the judiciary, is infested? One district judge this week thought that he could stop and completely end the funding freeze. One judge. One judge that was conveniently shopped for by the opposition, by the resistance, by the revolution. So are these tactics evil or are they necessary? Or is this exactly the wrecking ball that's needed to root this rot, this bureaucratic, ideological, Marxist, communistic, socialistic, uber-socialistic rot out of government? One of the overused words this week has been unelected for the last couple of weeks. Elon Musk wasn't elected. Neither were these bureaucrats. Neither was the woman who took it upon herself to send $60 million to New York City, defying a presidential executive order in order to house some illegal migrants in luxury hotels. Was she elected? No, she wasn't, and she was subsequently fired. I'd like to see her prosecuted. The groans of unelected authoritarianism, they ring hollow. And something like 77 million people in this country voted for this. It doesn't have any transparency to it, they say. He was incredibly transparent about this. He talked about Doge through the entire campaign. He said Elon Musk was going to do exactly what he did. It's what the American people voted for. Literally. There's nothing untransparent There's nothing hidden about this. He didn't spring it upon anybody. I don't understand the outrage. Maybe they were counting on it. Maybe they were waiting for it to start so they could use it as a rallying cry, so they could raise their little flag and call the troops into the streets. I don't know. But to pretend you're surprised by this, to pretend you're surprised and outraged by it, really? Are you? Good luck with the bureaucrat lives matter stuff. Good luck with the street riots. If that's what you want, if we are really at war and you're going to fight it out in the streets, if you're inciting violence. Remember when that was a bad thing to do not too long ago? But if you're inciting violence and you really want to get into the streets this summer, look where you are now, 4 years after the BLM riots. Look where you are just a year, not even a year, after the pro-Hamas protests in New York City, after the anti-Semitic outbursts calling for intifada. You own this, Democrats. Look where you are now. I encourage you. If you want to go out and you want to fight it out in the streets and you want to have another summer of love, summer of hate, summer of rage. Maybe that's it, the summer of rage. Knock yourselves out. You're not winning any hearts and minds with this shit, especially after people voted for it. People want it. They want to see the rot. They want the floorboard lifted up. They want to see the mold beneath and how bad it's gotten. So they know exactly who to tar and feather.